Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and executive chairman of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast, and in turn, continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
Experts, scientists, even American Diabetes Association was saying, hey, this is chronic progressive disease. Best we can do is give you more insulin and eventually amputate your legs, and then usually type 2 diabetes leads to heart attack and death. That's the outcome. You can't reverse it.
When the status quo says something's impossible, most people just admit defeat. They don't even try and solve the problem. But today's guest said, challenge accepted.
We've treated actually more than 250,000 patients and published 25 peer-reviewed papers. And I can irrefutably say that type 2 diabetes and many comorbidities around it is absolutely reversible nutritionally.
My name is Tom Ryan, and this is Welcome to the Arena, the ICR podcast. Each week, I sit down with today's business leaders to give you an inside scoop on some of America's most prosperous public companies, their origins, their challenges, and the keys to their success. Today, we're chatting with Sami Inkinen, CEO and co-founder of Virta Health, a leader in metabolic disease reversal from diabetes to obesity and more. The company works with over 500 large employers, health plans, and government organizations across the country, and has helped over 100,000 members reverse their diabetes and obesity, which is pretty unbelievable. Previously, Sami was the co-founder of online real estate marketplace Trulia, serving as COO, president, and board member until its IPO and eventual sale to Zillow. He held various positions at Microsoft and McKinsey. He also founded Fat Chance Row to raise awareness of the dangers of sugar and its connection to diabetes, rowing from California to Hawaii with his wife, completely unsupported. Sami holds an MS in engineering physics from Helsinki University of Technology and an MBA from Stanford, and he is also a triathlon age group world champion, having completed 7 Hawaii Ironmans. Let's enter the arena with Sami Inkinen. I found it really interesting that your journey started with a personal diagnosis of prediabetes. And how did it kind of shape your thinking as you went throughout your business career doing a bunch of different impressive things and maybe thinking about Virta Health always in the back of your mind?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say that I would say software and technology has been the hammer in my back pocket, and I've used that as a tool to solve meaningful problems and a little bit of a scientific background as well. I started as a radiochemist in a nuclear power plant after getting my physics degree back in Finland. And that's the time when nuclear power plants were still fashionable. And now they're coming back to fashion with AI because we need energy.
We need the power.
Exactly. So my background really is in using technology and software to build products and solve problems. And quite honestly, I have to say that as it relates to metabolic disease, which I consider is the health epidemic of our generation, driving type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and inflammation, and kidney disease, and fatty liver disease, and more and more and more, driving most of our healthcare costs. And 93% of American adults are metabolically unhealthy today. So I always thought, and this is very embarrassing to say, this was the storyline in my head. Everybody knows what they should do, but they don't. So we eat too much. You should eat less, and you should exercise to stay healthy. But people just are not doing that. So I always looked at this bundle of metabolic disease as kind of a problem of lack of willpower and people just being lazy. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that. And so if you had asked me, say 10, 15 years ago, let's go solve metabolic disease, I would have said, well, I don't know. Can you bottle willpower?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the
right.
way to solve it. That all changed in my mind when, as you read my background, I was and still a pretty high-performing endurance athlete. And year before Trulia went public, I even won the world championships in triathlon in my age group. So this was 2011 or 2012. And then soon after that, I found out that I was pre-diabetic myself and on my way to type 2 diabetes and poor metabolic health. And
that's incredible. But you were at that time, were you in great shape, or was this before training for the Ironmans and everything that you've done? Was it before that?
Yeah, I was in my 30s, 8-9% body fat, exercising 12 hours a week, and
Jeez.
a very, very fit individual. And
Yeah.
I thought, this is ridiculous. This should not be happening to me. But if it's happening to me, Americans have no choice. And sure enough, here we are. More than half of American adults have either pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And if you look at more broadly metabolic health, 93% of Americans today have at least one indication of poor metabolic health. So essentially everyone is struggling with metabolic disease or metabolic health. And that I had no plans to start a healthcare company. I had no plans to start a company that's on a mission to reverse metabolic disease in 1 billion people until that personal experience got me very interested in there's something here we don't understand. And if we can crack the code, maybe we can help millions and hopefully even billions of people. So that's how I ended up here.
It's a big idea. It's a big idea to chase. And, you founded Trulia, which was a home run, very successful. Everybody knows that brand, certainly in real estate. What were the lessons you learned being a founder and kind of getting that off the ground with all the blood, sweat, and tears? Were any of those lessons kind of transferable to Virta as you started it?
100%, absolutely, I would say. First, just to take a step back, I feel I've been very fortunate in my life and professionally. I like to say that I feel like I've never worked a single day, which is to say that I've just followed what's been interesting and what's been meaningful and then tried to make something out of it. And luckily, it has paid my bills. So that's kind of how I feel that I've been my entire career. And then thinking specifically building Trulia with an amazing co-founder and team from scratch to an IPO and, still here 2026, I think tens of millions of people are using it every month in America. So to build something meaningful, I'd say the couple of things that I literally have directly copy-pasted to Virta Health now is number one, as a founder, you need to have sort of a passion for whatever you're doing that's almost unexplainable. So you mentioned I worked at McKinsey, and you can do all kinds of spreadsheet analysis. Oh, here's a great business opportunity, but the journey is long, long, long. And if it's just a sort of a math exercise while you are doing something, you probably don't have the perseverance and grit that's pushing you forward. So that's one, that as a founder, you want some level of founder market fit. Number two is, I always think of when you're trying to transform an industry, build something from scratch, it's like you're trying to win the Olympic gold medal.
Yeah.
It is that hard, no matter how clever you try to be. And to win an Olympic gold medal, you want sort of A+ Olympic gold medal level everything, whether that's your early team members, your investors, your advisors. So that's kind of the second thing, that you always want to aim for the very, very best in everything. And then obviously there's dozens of lessons how to scale and build a company. But I would say the one thing I learned sort of hard way over the Trulia decade, that as a founder operator, obviously you have too much to do all the time. And it's very critical to identify the few things that truly make a difference. Because otherwise you just feel like you have a 500 item to-do list and you can only get to 11. And it's very stressful. And then if you don't kind of separate the big levers and the big movers, you can feel busy and productive and happy about it, but you actually miss the big stuff. So that's another one that I've tried to copy paste now and be very conscious of the few things that make all the difference, and then be just fine with the fact that you can't get to the 489 on your to-do list, and it's maybe fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I always think about, I founded ICR 30 years ago, and I always think like consultants and bankers, everybody's great, they're great at their jobs, but at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to grow a business on a spreadsheet than to actually do it and rally people. And you have to have a big passion for it to succeed. It can't be kind of like a nice to have, like you have to be so all in. And this is something that everyone can be all in on. I wanted to ask you, you're focused on reversing diseases like type 2 diabetes rather than like managing. And there's a lot of money and big industries formed around managing stuff. What made you confident that the reversal was possible when you were starting out? And, maybe a lot of the healthcare system didn't really believe that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mentioned I'm a physicist by training and kind of computer scientist as well. So I am not the medical doctor or the biology expert behind Virta, which is a good thing. But as I mentioned, my own stumble and finding out that I was pre-diabetic, as I started my own research project really in 2013 and 14, I was fortunate enough to met a couple of amazing scientists, particularly a Stanford-trained doctor and gentleman called Dr. Finney, who also had a PhD from MIT in nutritional biochemistry. And essentially, Dr. Finney, he then became my scientific co-founder. But he taught me two things. Number one, Sami, you're completely wrong. Obesity, type 2 diabetes is not a lack of willpower. It's driven by metabolic disease.
Yeah.
But the underlying key driver is nutrition. So this is a food problem. And then a second piece that was probably the most eye-opening to me was the traditional approach to using nutrition as a therapy to address weight loss or type 2 diabetes treatment or more broadly metabolic disease is backwards. We have been very focused on restricting how much you eat and trying to lose weight. And that just doesn't work. We have decades of evidence that it doesn't work. Instead, if you change what you eat rather than how much you eat, you could actually heal the metabolism and rather effortlessly even reverse type 2 diabetes. And so to answer your question, of course, initially I thought, well, this amazing scientist and his kind of research over 30 years seems to point to that direction. But come on, if we can reverse type 2 diabetes, someone's going to win a Nobel Prize. This sounds almost like too good to be true. And honestly, this was around the time that Theranos was out there. And I said, even though we don't need FDA approval for a nutrition-based therapy, we better run clinical trials. In fact, we started Virta with the 5-year prospective control clinical trial and say, we have to test this. Does it really work? And if it works, then we have evidence, published peer-reviewed evidence. And but going back to the very early days, you're absolutely right. Experts, scientists, even American Diabetes Association was saying, hey, this is chronic progressive disease. Best we can do is give you more insulin and eventually amputate your legs. And then usually type 2 diabetes leads to heart attack and death. That's the outcome. You can't reverse it. And obviously now here we are, decade later, we've treated actually more than 250,000 patients and published 25 peer-reviewed papers. And I can irrefutably say that type 2 diabetes and many comorbidities around it is absolutely reversible nutritionally.
Well, you've helped more than 100,000 members reverse diabetes and obesity for sure. What are some of the most surprising outcomes you've seen from members? Because I would imagine everyone is different. Everyone has different blood chemistry or, makeup, DNA. Some people might respond quicker, some slower. What are some of the kind of things that surprised you along the journey?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say you're absolutely right. When biology is different with every human, and then when you use nutrition as a therapy, individualization is so key. And how quickly someone's body will respond is always different. So that's one of the challenges in using nutrition as a therapy. I like to say it's harder than nuclear physics to make nutrition work. But in terms of outcomes, quite frankly, they're pretty stunning. So I'll give you a couple of the outcomes, just starting from the type 2 diabetes. Just the fact that we can reverse type 2 diabetes in majority of our patients, so 60% in our clinical trial at year 1, was completely off of diabetes-specific medications like insulin, and their blood sugar was normal. So literally someone with 10, 15-year history of type 2 diabetes would be off of insulin in a matter of months and have the disease reversed. So that's one. Yeah. Second one is the weight loss compares to that of GLP-1s. So 13% average body weight loss at 1 year and sustained at 2 years. And then thirdly, which is sort of more recent data that we published, we've been able to show that we prevent and reverse liver disease or fatty liver disease as well. And just to give you an example, it's now called MASH and MASLT. There's only one FDA-approved drug today for MASH. It's $45,000 a patient a year. $45,000 patient a year. And we have very comparable results in preventing and reversing liver disease nutritionally. And maybe one more thing I'll mention, we have a paper coming out that's showing more than 50% reduction in strokes, heart attacks, and deaths more than 54% reduction in strokes, heart attacks, and death. So the power of nutrition when you address the root cause of metabolic disease, again, not through restriction, but by changing what people eat, we deliver FDA-approved drug-like results with nutrition, which, again, what was thought to be absolutely impossible. And we've sort of almost like given up the hope that nutrition could work and just throwing pills and injections over the fence and say, take those and hope for the best.
Sami briefly mentioned GLP-1s there, and that's something I wanted to drill down on because the market for these drugs is in the tens of billions of dollars and growing every day. So I asked him about the role of GLP-1s in combating metabolic disease and how they fit into Virta's overall strategy.
Yeah, it's yes and yes and. In fact, our providers have now more than a decade of experience prescribing and managing GLP-1s. I was initially in a type 2 diabetes context, and then a couple of years ago when the first GLP-1 drugs starting from Wegovy were FDA approved for obesity. So we've been prescribing and managing GLP-1s again for about a decade. So this is how I would say GLP-1s for some patients for some time is a useful tool in a toolkit, can be a useful tool in a toolkit. But to kind of dummy it down, these drugs change how much you eat.
Yeah.
But if you don't change what you eat, and that's our expertise, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And I think most listeners probably have seen all the clinical trials from the pharma companies that the second you come off these drugs, your weight regains.
Yep.
And typically you gain the fat back and then you've lost the muscle. And so if you don't start changing what you eat, it's kind of a temporary patch. And we've also been able to show now, these are published and peer-reviewed results, that when patients discontinue GLP-1s for whatever reason, maybe they want off or they can't afford to have it, whatever the reason is, we've been able to sustain in our Virta care with our nutrition treatment all that weight loss. I think the 18 months after coming off is the longest time period that we have published results. And so yeah, they are useful drugs for some, but I think what's lost in a conversation today, it's sort of you're either on a drug and you're on a drug forever.
Yep.
Or nutrition. It's kind of like either or debate, which to me, quite honestly, it's completely silly. Let's be honest. It's both.
Yeah.
And that's the magic bag of tricks that you need to address obesity and metabolic disease at scale.
You talked about every human being having a different biology. How does the strength of your background in technology, how does technology and data kind of combine in delivering something that's highly personalized nutrition-wise that you know is going to work?
Yeah, well, honestly, using nutrition as a therapy without technology and telemedicine, and I'll give you a couple of specific examples, it would be impossible because you have to individualize to literally to the N equals 1. And when nutrition is medicine, patients are making a medical decision 2, 3, 4 times a day, and then tomorrow it's different. So it's much more complicated than just giving a pill with a single same molecule. So you really have to individualize. And I often use this sort of self-driving car as an analogy that if the traditional approach, you go to a doctor and says, okay, here's a list of things to eat and here's a list of things not to eat. Come back in 3 months. So it's a little bit like a self-driving car where you'd say like, all right, let's just go straight. Well, guess what happens? First corner, car is off the road. Well, guess what happens to people when they try to follow a nutrition protocol? First corner, they are, off the road. And it's usually 2-3 days later after you left the doctor. So what we do instead is, first of all, one, we remotely monitor your biomarkers multiple times a day. So this is kind of like the self-driving car with frequent sampling with sensors and lidars, like is it on the road or not? And then secondly, both software and our providers and coaches can change the course and advise you and individualize based on the feedback that's coming in. So there's no way we could do what we do without technology. And so just to give you a specific example, we initially get your labs, we get your sort of background. Maybe you say, I'm a vegan. Well, we aren't going to tell you to eat bacon and eggs for breakfast because if you're vegan, you're going to start hating me immediately. And so we give you a recommendation. And then we measure your biomarkers remotely, again, multiple times a day. Some of those biomarkers are things like blood glucose, which is necessary to adjust medications. We may be able to get you off of insulin in a matter of first week or 2 weeks. Some of the data is like that. And some of the data tells us what you have been eating and how your body is responding. And then we may say, hey, I think you're having a little bit too much protein. So let's reduce the protein amount a little bit and increase some healthy fats and vegetables or whatever that might be. So that's the approach. And then you end up, essentially our IP is like a self-driving car, which is keeping you between the white and the yellow lane or line and not going off the road. And with rapid iteration, we can just keep you going all the way from, I don't know, LA to New York.
And, I think what I've read is that employers are really catching on to the cost benefit of this, not only doing the right thing by their team members and employees, but also there's a financial argument for it, I would imagine. You work with 500 employers and health plans and government organizations. What do you think tipped the scales for these organizations to kind of come on board and work with you?
Yeah. Well, first I will say, obviously, in public statements, although we are privately held companies still, we are very careful. So that 500 is already more than 800.
Okay,
so we're growing
there you go.
Very, very fast. So last year we grew our top line 79% year over year. And,
wow.
The company scale is already in hundreds of millions in revenue. But to answer your question, I have learned 23 years in America that the love language of American capitalism is money.
Yep.
So essentially what we sell to these plan sponsors, whether you are, United Airlines or UPS or Marriott Hotels, examples of our clients, we sell them savings. So we go in and say, hey, your healthcare costs, largely because of metabolic disease, are skyrocketing. What do you say if we could come and lower those costs? And guess what? If we don't, you don't pay us anything. And as a side benefit of that, we make your employees healthy, and they are probably going to be very excited and happy about the outcomes. By the way, to the point that we have multiple patients who have permanently tattooed Virta, the company logo, in their bodies.
No way. That's
no,
unbelievable.
this is true. But that really is the pitch. We can make you money by treating your employees or members. And if it doesn't work, you pay nothing. We literally take 100% downside risk. And then, of course, we show the clinical evidence, the safety and the outcomes that we deliver. But it's really an economic argument first, and then secondarily, which to me and us as a company is of course most important. That's the mission: make people healthy. But let's face it, it's capitalism, and it's hard to sell if it's just kind of a altruistic health argument.
For sure. And then, I mentioned earlier, it just seems like there's a whole ecosystem of companies in healthcare that are so entrenched. And I think generally it's an industry that's very tough to disrupt. What's the biggest hurdles in convincing the system that kind of diabetes reversal could work and that this is a viable option?
Yeah, well, somebody might listen and go like, wait a second, that's like selling water in Sahara. Like that should be so easy. Like it makes clinical sense. It makes clinical sense to cure someone. It makes ethical sense to not have someone end up with amputations, death. And it makes economic sense. People save money. Like, come on, that is so simple.
Yeah.
Kind of, it is, but it's not. And so I would say status quo. Whenever you have something new, the status quo is the hardest thing to overcome on a high level. And what does that mean? It's if you're a benefits leader or chief medical officer in a large health plan, you go, wait a second, we've had diabetes for really as an epidemic for 30 years. We've been doing it in one way. We've been prescribing medications. That's in the guidelines. It's obviously chronic progressive disease. And now you have some sort of a tech company startup, although we are way past that today, claiming that they can reverse this disease. Sounds too good to be true. And so I would say just the status quo is probably the biggest. And obviously now that we're at this scale of close to 1,000 clients, and like I mentioned, the most recent number is more than 250,000 patients treated, outcomes. It's becoming easier and easier, but still the challenge in the healthcare is that while we spend $5 trillion or more than $5 trillion in healthcare today per year in America, of which, by the way, CDC estimates it's $4 trillion is chronic disease. So essentially 4 times our military budget goes to chronic disease that in our experience is reversible. Healthcare is still very, very kind of local. So rather than a $5 trillion market, it's almost like 5 million, $1 million pockets. if you will. So there's a lot of clients to sell, a lot of partners to work with, a lot of ecosystem partners, and that's complicated. It takes time, it takes money. So that's been one kind of a big lesson for me coming from outside of healthcare, that it's not as straightforward as putting up a website and releasing a peer-reviewed paper and everybody comes. No, you actually have to build an entire organization to work with the PBMs and consultants and employers and health plans and government entities, and quickly you realize you have 100 people running around the country for a decade to accomplish that.
Yeah. I always kind of think like if you have 12 incredible people working with you, you can kind of take over the world. You guys are right in the middle of kind of healthcare and technology and nutrition, three disparate things coming together to kind of create value for all your stakeholders. Talk about your team. Like, how do you build a team that's capable of like innovating across those three industries as they all kind of collide together?
Yeah, well, that's one thing that's a little bit different from my Trulia experience. I will say that as an industry, residential real estate was completely new to me. I was an immigrant fresh off the boat, and sure, I knew software, I knew technology, but I knew nothing about residential real estate and the brokers and the agents. And so my approach usually has been that, first of all, I surround myself with phenomenal advisors and experts who know the industry, listen to them very, very carefully, and then selectively ignore. And why do I say that? Obviously, if you copy paste what people have been doing for the last 20, 30 years in the industry, nothing's going to change. So you have to be humble and learn, but then also realize that what is it that can be done differently from outcomes perspective, product perspective, or go to market. But that's kind of step one, surround yourself with experts who really know the industry and learn as much as you can. Then internally, I would say one of the interesting and fun and sometimes challenging thing with Virta has been, we are kind of a full stack healthcare company in that medical doctors work in our provider group. So we have medical doctors. We have software engineers and artificial intelligence and machine learning experts in-house. We have sales folks in-house. We have health coaches in-house, and all the obviously the other functions that you need in a company. So that kind of a full stack company that's operating at the speed of tech startup or tech company, yet delivering care where patient safety and outcomes is in our fingertips every day. It's kind of it's an interesting balancing act. And I'll give you a practical example. If you're a software engineer in San Francisco, fast for you is like shipping code at least once a week. If you're a medical doctor, fast for you is guidelines change once a year. And so marrying those different cultures and approaches takes a lot of finesse, and that's been an interesting puzzle for me and in some ways challenged as well. But that's the only way we could do what we do, that we are truly a full stack operation. And I think that is the future, as opposed to, you have a software company building AI and then selling to a health system, and obviously, health systems will be using software and AI, but it's very difficult to transform new way of delivering care, new types of outcomes, new type of economic model, unless you have everything in-house.
Yeah, I would imagine that really creates a moat around the business too. It's just not easy to pick up and do it. I'm like, oh, let's just build a website and whatever. It's just way more complicated than that. I had a couple of personal questions for you. I'd love to hear more about kind of rowing from California to Hawaii, like almost 3,000 miles with your wife. What was that experience like? What lessons did you learn out of it with like resilience and toughness and all that stuff? It just sounds unbelievable.
Yeah, so indeed, this was summer 2014, so about a decade ago now. We hopped into a rowing boat in Monterey, California, and rowed to Hawaii, and it took 45 days and 3 hours. And again, unsupported, there's no helicopters and follow boats and stuff like that. And that was with my wife. It was absolutely life-transforming experience, first of all. And the fact that when we hopped off the boat in Waikiki Beach in August of 2014, and I hugged my wife and she hugged me, I knew that there's only one person in the world who knows what we went through, how hard it was, and how we got through. And then and there, I would say I knew that if we can get through that, we can get through anything. And it was a very sweet moment to hop off the boat. But then, there were many other sort of life lessons. I would say it was during that role that I made the final decision to go and start scaling Virta and building it again on this crazy mission to reverse metabolic disease in 1 billion people. And the lesson came from the realization that the times in my life that I have been uncomfortable, kind of leaning over the edge, but not falling over the edge, those have been the most rewarding emotionally in life. And this sort of choice of life of comfort versus pushing and creating, which is what the entire row was, 1 million awe strokes and back pain and pain on your butt.
God, I can't even imagine.
So that was one realization. I was like, hey, I don't want to be just kind of sitting on a beach and be a consumer. I want to continue to be a creator. So that was one. And then I'll just quickly throw a big family decision was the realization to start a family. And before the row, we both thought kids are a nuisance and life is too good to have kids. And now we have 2 wonderful girls. And that was a big decision over the row.
Changes your life. I have 3 of them. So it's just an incredible thing also with the Ironman competitions that you've been through. You know, you would imagine you've learned so much about resilience and endurance and things like that. So great ways to apply that to building Virta. I always think that for any organization, doing 2 or 3 things every year really well is difficult to do, but it's hard to do everything in 1 year. As we sit here kind of in May of 26, looking out to the rest of the year and into 27, what are the 2 or 3 things that you're really excited about with the business?
Yeah, number one for us is the scaling. Honestly, we have found ourselves in the eye of the hurricane. It's metabolic disease again, the health epidemic of our generation, GLP-1s, the cost pressure and how to use them optimally. So, and this is not an exaggeration, we're really in the eye of the hurricane. Employers, health plans, and then individual patients as well. Like, I need you, I need your help. So that's one, scaling. Number 2, comes as no surprise. Every company, certainly for us, like how do we leverage AI maximally, but do it in a responsible way? And that's not just in the product, patient-facing product, but all other functions. So I'd say that's the kind of second thing for us. And then the third one is really trying to take disease reversal mainstream and convincing the world that this is the future. And how do we do that? It's not just me saying those words. We've really tried to use evidence. I mentioned we published a paper on showing preventing liver disease, similar paper coming out on chronic kidney disease, broad spectrum inflammation, and really trying to show that, hey, nutrition may have failed us over the last 3 decades, but when done properly with the proper support and the right kind of use of technology, we can deliver drug-like outcomes. So that's kind of the third thing I'm very focused on, and it's kind of showing hope to the millions or hundreds of millions, globally billions of people suffering with metabolic disease, that the pill or the injection, again, may be a tool for some, but that's not the ultimate solution.
That was Sami Inkinen, co-founder and CEO of Virta Health. He and his team are attacking metabolic disease, specifically diabetes, through the use of data, education, and technology. And they're harnessing those insights for members and really helping them improve their lives, and in some cases, saving their lives. Sami has a long track record of success in building great businesses, which bodes well not only for Virta Health, but for the thousands of members who are embracing change and improving their health outcomes with better nutrition. I'm Tom Ryan, and I'll see you next time back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.